morning, everyone. My name is Antonio Kern from Trialog, French SME. It is my real pleasure to chair today this session entitled Combining Business Protection and Privacy Protection Practices in Big Data Marketplace. This session is depicted by this picture. We see the big data marketplace and three components. First of all, from the business side, supplying data, then from the business side, making use of data. But of course, we are using data, so there's data processing. There might be personal data, so the user must have control of data. So those are the topics we're talking about. Can we make a business? Is it sustainable? Things like that. In this session, we have a specific guest, Anne Cavoukian. She's not there, but she sent to me very kindly a video. We have a look at that. We should have been 4 panelists, but one is missing. She's sick. I will call her, and she will make her presentation. If the connection is good, then we still enjoy her ideas. Okay? And the session will be more like we ask questions. Then at the end, we leave the floor for 5 minutes questions from the audience. Okay? So it's my pleasure to introduce you our moderator, Andriy Ilyuk. He's a researcher at the law faculty of the Göttingen University.
Thank you very much, Antonio. And thank you also for inviting me to this very interesting panel. All the issues are really fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about them. So, yeah, as you mentioned, the video from Anne Cavoukian, I think we can start from that issue, and maybe it will give us a good background for what topics we are dealing with.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to speak to you today. I'm sorry I can't be there with you live, but at least I can give you this message via video. And the essence of it is you must embed privacy by design into all that you do. Big data, data analytics, you name it. You can't do it without proactively embedding privacy into your processes. But I always want to remind you what privacy is and what it is not. Privacy doesn't equal secrecy. It equals control. Personal control relating to the uses of the data subject's information. User control is critical, informational self-determination. And context is key, which is why it's so important that the data subject be the one that makes the decisions relating to the uses of their data. I'm going to go very quickly because I've only got a few minutes with you. I want to talk about privacy by design, and I refer to it as the decade of privacy by design because in 2010, when I was a privacy commissioner, it was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. We realized that we needed to have privacy proactively embedded up front into the design of all of our operations, data analytics, security operations, you name it. Why? Because we realized that regulatory compliance after the fact, as commissioners, we were only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of privacy harms. So we needed something to complement regulatory compliance, which is no longer sustainable by itself to protect privacy. And that's what privacy by design does. Upfront, tries to prevent the privacy harms from arising. And we've had great success. It's been translated into 40 languages. It has a real global presence. And this is the essence of it. In addition to being proactive, I want you to get rid of the zero-sum mindset of privacy versus data analytics, privacy versus security. That whole zero-sum mentality is so yesterday, and it will set you back. Replace it with a doubly enabling system of privacy and data analytics, privacy and big data. You will get so much more done by substituting a positive sum mindset. I don't have time to review all of the 7 foundational principles with you, but I'm happy to do so. Send me any questions you have after the fact and I will respond. If you think that privacy by design is just an academic construct, au contraire. In this paper, while I was commissioner, this sums up 22 papers that we wrote with all of the major tech companies in the world. Think of any major tech company. Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM, of course, I'm leaving out a bunch, but take a look. We wanted to show how doable it was to do privacy and data analytics, privacy and sensors and research, you name it. And of course, we have the GDPR, which is coming into effect in May of this year, and for the first time, it has privacy by design, data protection by design, as it's called in the European Union, and privacy as the default, actually embedded in the GDPR. This is fabulous. This is going to raise the privacy bar dramatically, and you will notice the difference in no time. Now, I would not be so bold as to say this, but Information Age wrote a few years ago that it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. That's too much of a stretch. However, what it was suggesting was if you lead with privacy by design, you're going to go a long way to following the GDPR. I'm going to stop now, but I will be returning to talk to you again right at the end, so bear with me. Thank you very much.
So this is the setting point or starting point for our today's discussion, that these issues of privacy and security, or privacy and business, they don't need to be in conflict. And today we'll try to learn all the different approaches on ensuring the synergy between these issues. And we were supposed to, as Antonio mentioned, to start with the presentation of Giulia Marcocchia. She's an expert in innovation management and telecom Paris tech, but she got sick, but we are trying to call her now, and maybe we'll still be able to hear her presentation.
So let's cross our fingers. The connection is not that good.
Hello?
Giulia?
Yeah.
Okay, hello. So you are talking in front of a bunch of people. So we have your slides, and you can start. You can introduce yourself. So you have 8 minutes, Giulia.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Giulia speaking, and it's a pleasure and honor to be part of such a panel. Thank you for attending it, and my apologies for not being here today. The main topic we're gonna talk through my slides is the relationship between the data marketplace and the business model, and which is the best way to create a business model, but most important, how can you capture value? We are overall facing a high level of uncertainty in the context. Many factors are changing, making the process that once was linear, not linear anymore, but more in a networked shape. So we can start with the next slide, Antonio, please. Certainly many of you are familiar with the concept of platforms, and there are many ways of representing it, but through the participation of projects in which I met heterogeneous partners, I understood the importance of clarifying the object. It is not all the trivial issues, because many people have a visualization of platforms and understanding of the concept different. So this is why I'm presenting here a very simplified version, in which you can see all the participants are grouped in three main areas. You have the complementary, the platforms, and the users. And we linked it with typology of relationship and typology of impact from an economical point of view. What is very important to highlight in the dynamics that we have among those three groups is that we have, first of all, externalities. So what is an externalities among those actors? There are side effects on other actors that don't have no impact in costs. So user benefits increase while user numbers increase. They can afford their positive or negative. And this is really linked to the network effects, in which you have assets generated by a group of platforms participants, users, and complementers. The more who use the products or service, then the higher its value for the group. And then more interesting is for complementers to jump on the platform to participate. More complementers participate, and more users will adopt the service or the product delivered by the platforms. And this is very relevant to the platform profitability. So what are the main impacts of those considerations in platform profitability is speed of adoption. So it's critical mass is needed both at the data level and the user levels. So the so-called chicken and egg problems between the offer and the demand. We have offer and demand co-built and coming from an interaction. And then we have the consideration of the externalities for understanding where the value is, how we can capture, and therefore how I can build a sustainable profit for me to participate in the platforms. Another important element is the openness degree of the platform. Can you please, Antonio, go to the other slide, please?
Yes.
The scale of the dynamics they just described are equally impacted by the degree of openness of a platform, which means that I allow few or several complementers to join for the benefits of the user groups. And this will impact the way I build the value in my value chain and how we capture it. Here you have some examples, which comes from the mobile device industry. So huge companies you all know, divided in which typology of objects is considering in this platform, and we have very close value chain derived from a degree which is considered as closed, and the other one is an open. So an open value chain will allow more participants to join. Those considerations don't mean that one choice is better on the others in every case. It just means that there are very different ways of building a platform around the decision of which is the openness degrees, and therefore it's important to understand which type of business model you have to take into consideration in order to orchestrate all the elements toward a sustainable profit generation, because different strategies need to be activated in order to nurture the platform adoption depending on the openness degrees. And then we go into the business model design part. Can you please go to the next one, Antonio, please? Thank you.
Yes.
There are several business models, authors, and typologies, and it's more like get it all with just a business model. Probably most known is the Canvas, which has been designed by Pinor and Ostenwalder. And now I'm presenting here two that I'm using in my research for business model design and assessment. This one is being proposed by researchers from Karlsruhe and Cambridge. It's called Data-Driven Business Model. And you can see it's quite a familiar shape because it's shaped as an organization chart with boxes that are related to elements linked to the visualization of the business model canvas. So you have the data sources, and you can have internal or external data sources, and then depending on which one, different typology of data, which are the key activities then that you want to provide. All of them, the data generation, the acquisition, the processing, aggregation, analytics, visualization, distribution. Some of them, if not all, the others are provided by partners of yours, or just done externally in other forms. And how do you package the offer? What's in the offer? Data, information, knowledge, or services. Which are your customers? And here you have just business to business, business to consumer. But we know that it's much more complex, because you can have business to consumer, you have business to government, you have business to X. So this part should be more detailed. And then you have all the type of revenue models and in a consideration on which specific cost advantage you can have from the decision on all these parts. So this tool can help in giving shape to your own model, and you can use it to identify and assess which are the potential data sources. It's not sector related, so it's quite handy, but it's a static framework. So it doesn't show you the dynamics of connecting those boxes, and it doesn't make you aware of what is the use of your business model. So this is why we, during our research, use another way of framing it, which is this next slide. Thank you, Antonio. Which is a framework, conceptual framework, in which you have first of all, which are the principle and why do a business model, which is your reach, which are the functions that you are targeting, and there, which are the dimensions. So you can see is a more, let's say, overall comprehensive level than just defining the dimension and reflecting what I'm aiming at with this model. I won't go into the details of explaining this because we don't have time. So for all of you that need more information on this, I put the reference so you can find the detailed explanation of it. But I just would like to put two highlights on this frame. And one is, first of all, it's very important that you must understand what you're doing with this business model and which is your intent when you have big data platform to be considered. So it's while you're using it, do you want to show changes over time? Do you want to create coherence or designing and evaluating different units or level within organizations? Are we talking about one organization or different organizations acting together? So this is for the modeling principle. And then you need to know that the reach of business models, it's very relevant to the strategy and processes. So you are in the intersections between what strategy represents and what are the choices in terms of processing signifies then a set of business implementations of practices and functions, which will impact your organization. As far as the functions, you probably are aware of the alignment instruments are interceding in terms of making the connection in between the technology and innovation and the economical value in the strategic impact, probably less what is the knowledge capital and whatever, and all the consideration on what is intangible and tactical in terms of helping you to build an enduring competitive advantage. And then you go into what we know more, which is the value propositions and the others. One consideration on the architecture is very important to know that how the organization is shaped in terms of technological architecture and organizational infrastructure, and can allow a different flow in terms of product, service, and information, which impact then the value proposition and the value finance. And we talked about one industry and a firm. What about ecosystem? If you go to the next one, and there is a proposal of categorization of business models depending on how the several actors are interacting together in terms of how they shape their cooperation, how they share the main problem, which is the capex of building a platform based on digital or in digital infrastructure, and how they create value, how they share this value. We identify three main topologies, driven by public, driven by private, and hybrid business models, in which we have actors that interact in a different way. If you talk about CapEx or OpEx, in which the value capturing is much wider and much more intangible as well. And we are then going to describe why are we interested in presenting you the project Automat. Project Automat, if you can go to the next one, please, Antonio, is an Horizon 2020 founded project and is targeting the construction of a prototype of a marketplace, collecting data from cars and then transforming them into packages to be sold through the marketplace to service providers for creating new services in mobility or in all other sectors. You see here all the partners. So we have OEMs, European OEMs. We have we have two service providers here in meteorologics in two different sectors. We have Atlas and Tudo for what is the platform functioning and architecture and the cloud service, and then me is the Institute Min Telecom for the business model designing, consulting services in terms of project shape and cybersecurity, and the Trialog, of course, for privacy and cybersecurity, which is a very, very important part of the business model, and we will see why.
So Giulia, for 1 minute.
The platform is good. Go to the next one. So we have a big marketplace, and cars are uploading the data. They go into the back end of the OEMs, and then from the background OEMs, they will go first operations, and they are transferred into the cloud, and the marketplace receives requests from the service providers, and then download the data and sell it to their service providers, which on their side they will sell it to business or to direct consumers after aggregation. What is important to discuss here is next one, please. The relationship between the business and the personal data. So this is the configuration that Automat is taking into consideration. You see several OEMs collecting data from vehicles used by people. The data are going into the OEM backend, and the decision is to have a vault in which every vehicle owner has its personal data. So in this way, personal data will be anonymized and will be kept safe. If you go to the next one, please, how is the linking between the business is if we are, the privacy and the regulation on the security of the data are impacting the adoption rate, because if the users are considering that data are safe, then they will be more willing to allow the use of their data. So you see the arrows with the circle, and they will be more willing to use it and to buy the data. So next one, please. As a final message, the key factors to platform adoptions are therefore data access, data ownership, data aggregation, and regulation. The regulation will help people and to build trust on the marketplace and to use of data, and therefore will increase data access and will ignite the dynamics we just described at the beginning. And thank you very much for your attention. I hope I won't run too late, and I'm here for questions if you wish.
It was perfect, Giulia. And what we'll do is, if there is a question that is very specialized to your domain, we'll call you again. Okay? Thank you.
Okay. Giulia. Okay. Thank you, and have a nice session.
Okay.
Okay, that was a very interesting presentation on business models that can ensure this synergy between different interests. Now we have a legal expert on the panel, namely Natalie Bertels from the Catholic University of Leuven, Center for IT and IP Law. Her research focuses on data protection challenges of big data, cloud, Internet of Things settings. So I would like to ask you, Natalie, about what are the contractual approaches that would create synergy between the big data, intellectual property rights management on the one hand, and the citizen privacy rights management on the other hand?
Yes. Thank you, and good morning, everyone, and thank you, Andriy, for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, we are building a European data economy, and the Commission recognizes and it stresses actually the importance of supporting the emergence of data markets. There is evidence. I could refer to the PIMS report or the IDC report on the industrial data platforms as key enablers for industry digitization, but also and only just the attention that this topic is receiving in the upcoming ICT H2020 calls. So this evidence, it's evidence that shows that there is a continuous need for research and innovation on personal data platforms and on industrial data platforms that can enable and facilitate secure, trusted, and controlled data sharing. And Antonio asked me to comment and feed the debate today from a legal perspective, and I was very happy to accept this invitation and to contribute to this panel, because the panel already reflects that it's only an integration of expertise. So we have expertise here at the table, business modeling, economic practice, legal, technical, and it's only this integration of expertise that will allow us to break through the data silos, and that will allow us to reach the full potential of responsible exploitation of big data. So many thanks, Andriy, for your question. And it's clear that if we want to put in place big data markets, we need appropriate big data management. So we need to tackle issues like access, ownership, transfer of data, exploitation, exchange. And you know that at present in EU there is no legislation that is specifically regulating the question of ownership in data. So there are, neither in case law is there an explicit recognition of the ownership in data. There was discussion, there was a door opened recently in the UseSoft case where there could be ownership of intangible asset, but there's many discussions still there. And there is the proposal that I would like to mention as well for directive for the supply of digital content, where it is suggested that you could pay with your personal data, so including that there is some kind of ownership there. There are ownership-like rights, and then I'm referring to IPR, so intellectual property rights and trade secrets, that can have an impact on data and that can confer some kind of protection for certain types of data. Data as such are usually not protected by IPR, but we are coming back to that when we're going through the different elements of contractual arrangements. Then there's personal data. So personal data, recent attention, a lot of attention, GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation. It determines when you can use data, for which purposes, who you can share the data with, whether you can transfer the data to another party. But there's no real ownership reading in the document, reading in the GDPR for the individual. It says that it's data related, data about, but there is still discussion whether this creates an ownership in the head of the individual. But you know, the essence of data protection is indeed to install control. So control of the individual over its personal data. So summarizing, there is no explicit regulation of ownership. So data holders at the moment, they are relying on contractual arrangements. So these contracts are very important. Contractual arrangements are very important. And the question was aiming at comparing IPR management and privacy rights management. So at the moment, entering into the discussion is copyright, I would assume, database rights, trade secrets, and the GDPR. So I think there's already an overlap between these different protective mechanisms. But there's definitely also still a big amount of data that is outside the scope of any of these mechanisms. And then I'm referring to non-personal, industrial, or commercial data that does not present these typical requirements from IPR. That's not original, that's not distinctive, that's not novel, or any similar criteria. But that type of data, I think there's a really big amount of that data, and it can be impacted by the free flow of data initiative. And that's why I wanted to enter also into the discussion this proposed regulation, and that is actually driving the discussion on the creation of a new ownership right, actually more in the line of a data producer's rights. So we're coming back to that later. Now allow me to go through some of the IPRs and to stress elements, characteristics of these IPRs that could be valuable in our discussion that we are having here today in the panel. I think from the copyright perspective, there is a lot on transfer and licensing. And Thierry will come back to the licensing question later on. He told me before, so I'm not going to go in too deep. So I think there's definitely a useful toolkit there when you look at the reproduction, distribution, communication to public, these different rights, balanced off by actually the copyright exceptions. So I think there you could have useful elements that we could try to realize in these data markets. From database as well, database there is next to copyright a sui generis protection that allows to protect your investment, and that could indeed, if you substantially change the data, could be considered a new investment and could renew your protection under database. For trade secrets, I would refer to confidentiality, so the non-disclosure agreements. It's an integral part of your data protection, but it's also a very important security measure. So these are just a few elements a few approaches that could have their benefit when we are trying to build a good data management strategy and procedures for data markets. But in essence, we should not forget that there is a difference. And so it's personal data protection and these ownership-like rights that we've been discussing. They're not the same. So ownership, these IPR rights, they are protecting, they're exclusive rights, and they are protecting an economic asset, while GDPR is protecting an individual's right to privacy and data protection. So it determines actually a list of responsibilities to a data holder or data controller when they can use data, for which purposes, etc. But the essence is, as I already mentioned, control by the individual over its personal data. So I think that there's already been a lot of valuable effort in stock taking on these relevant elements, interesting elements coming from IPR, coming from data protection with regards to data management. But I still feel that we have to continue to operationalize these elements in projects like Automat when we are considering specific data-driven ecosystems. And I think we should try then to look and evaluate and then provide more evidence to policymakers about these different approaches and their benefits, their enabling characteristics, but also their hurdles and their limitations. Because we could ask ourselves the question whether this contractual approach is sufficient, whether it could really function in this big data setting where we have a multitude of actors, when we have a multitude of different types of data, and when there's a strong focus on enabling operational and transferable data. So I think contract at the moment, in my activities within the Big Data Value Association, I'm currently the vice chair of the Task Force on Policy and Societal Issues, and in response to the communication of the Commission on building the EU data economy, we did a stock taking with the members, and we drafted a position paper. And you see that there are many, many different approaches to this and feelings to this contractual approach. There is the flexibility of it, that was very much appreciated, but there is also the uncertainty, since at the moment there is no harmonization at EU level of contract law. And there is indeed this element that has limited viability towards third parties. So I think 1 minute, okay, I was wrapping up. I think and I hope to welcome also your contributions in questions maybe later on that we should critically evaluate. I think a good way is indeed like the Automat project to do this for a specific data-driven ecosystem to see which of these elements could work together and in which way it could create synergies and where it has limitations. This is also very relevant to the discussion at the moment, whether we should create a new ownership right specifically for data, this data producer right that could accommodate the fact that there are multiple actors in the data value chain that contribute to data, that invest in data, and if you would have an exclusive right or a joint held exclusive right, that this would not be the right approach, that we actually need a non-exclusive right that would that would fit better the reality of our big data markets. So I would like to hear your input and if there are any questions, and this is definitely a debate that will continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalie. And we already had on the business model and the presentation on the legal issues. So I think now it will be interesting to hear about what really exists, what technological solutions we have for these questions, for these issues. And for this issue, I would ask Xuebing Zhou. She's a researcher in Munich who works for Huawei, the company that you all know probably, namely in the privacy lab, cybersecurity and privacy lab of Huawei Technologies in Munich. And she's a leading researcher on the areas like the identification technologies for big data, anonymization techniques for smart devices, and also on the standardization in this area. She's a co-editor of some of the standards on big data privacy and security. So Xuebing, I would like to ask you whether there are any technological approaches that would create the synergy between the mechanisms for business confidentiality and the mechanisms for de-identification.
Yeah, thank you, Andriy, for the introduction and for the nice questions. And before I address to these questions, I would like to look at how difficult to protect the data in big data scenario. So we analyze the data we publish today. So maybe not safe or not secure in the future. We never know what kind of this data can be combined with other data, or maybe the data analytic tool becomes more powerful tomorrow. So this is why a lot of individuals and also the company has a lot of concerns about the confidentialities, also the privacy protection. And also if we publish this data, so the data cannot be taken back again. But on the other hand, we also saw that the organizations and individuals are continuing to sharing this data with others. And to address this problem, we really need to do something on the technology level. And actually, the identification technologies is a very good tools to solve this problem. And actually what this identification technology can do is they remove the link of the identifying information in our data set and the data subjects. In this way, we can reduce the privacy risks. And this is actually the common mechanisms we need for anonymization and pseudonymization. And if you look at the requirement of GDPR, and actually the pseudonymization is also considered as a basic protection of the data from the legal aspect. So therefore, identification is very, very important. And from the technology set, we can classify the identification technology to different categories. They are statistical-based method, encryption-based method, and also a method based on suppressions and generalizations, and also the privacy models. And actually how we make use of this technology in practice is really depends on our use cases and also the privacy risk we want to avoid in the specific cases. And actually in a current ISO project 20998, 20889, sorry, I'm confused with number, it's talking about the privacy enhancing data identification technologies, and this gives very good overview of these technologies. But here, so I would like to emphasize a specific class of this identification technology, namely the privacy model. So maybe some of you is not familiar with that. So this kind of technology is including like k-anonymity, IR diversity, T-closeness, and differential privacy. And this class of technology is very, very powerful. They can provide very strong protection, and additionally provide very nice features, and they can quantify the privacy risk. It's very good if we want to control our privacy risk in specific cases. And another issue I want to say is currently we can observe in a lot of companies, they also applying the identification technologies, and even the user give the concerns that they allowed the company to collect this data or process this data. And this is very clever way that they can make sure that, or they can in advance to prevent any privacy risk in the future. This is really highly recommended. And but another issue I want to say is, although that the identification technology is very, very powerful, but it's not perfect. So we know that we cannot achieve perfect pseudonymization or anonymization. We can only ensure it in a given use cases. It means that if this data is anonymized or pseudonymized in a specific context, and if later we make uses in another context, or maybe combined with other data, so maybe the privacy guarantee we given is not valid anymore. So therefore, actually this is very common happened in big data context. So therefore, we really need a risk-based approach that we can monitor and control our risk in the system. And but another issue we need to also consider is the trade-off between privacy and utility. The problem is if we offer very high privacy protection, and we will definitely to reduce the quality or maybe also the usability of this data. And here we really need to make a good trade-off. And at this point, and the confidentiality can really help. So we can imagine that if the data sharing is happened between the trusted party and regulated with NDAs, and we can tolerate the protection with tolerate to applying the identification technologies with not strong protections. However, if we really publish and open the data for a lot of audience, and in this scenario, we really need to apply the very strong data protection and identification technologies. Yeah, and then come back to our original questions. So actually, our data identification technologies is designed also to consider the confidentialities of private data. So therefore, it is a very also these technologies are also very useful, can be also applied to solve the business confidentialities problem. So I can give you a very good example. It is the homomorphic encryption and secure multi-party computation. And these technologies allow the organization to share this data in encrypted form. And the data analytics is happened only in the encrypted format. And then in this way, so both the business confidentialities and also the data privacies can be ensured. But unfortunately, they have also the limitation of these technologies. They are currently still very expensive. We considering the computational power and also the communication overhead. But I'm sure that we can expect in the future more technology breakthrough in this area, driven by the big data trend and also the increasing interest from the industry. And then to this end, I would say that it's very, very important to apply the identification technologies in the big data marketplace. And I'm also can see that in the future, I'm sure the synergy between the business confidentialities mechanisms and the identification technologies can lead more sophisticated technology development that both the organizations and individuals can profit from that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us some examples of the technologies. Maybe you can let us know which of these technologies are already mature enough to be implemented on the market and which still need to be researched further and to be improved before being applied on the market.
Yeah, so actually if we look at for the big data context, the statistic-based method and also some crypto method like hashing and also the anonymity and different privacy, we already find some use cases in praxis. But however, the privacy model-based method like differential privacy and anonymity, and they still have some potential to improve. And here I can recommend the repository of ENISA, and they have very good documentation, also checking the trend of the development of the technologies. And so if you want to find more detailed information, you can find there.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And we are staying at the technology section, for which we have our last speaker, namely Thierry Nagellen. He works for the telecommunication provider, namely Orange, as a research program manager in Orange Labs in France and in charge of big data activities, including the research on ubiquitous big data, time series, and related hardwares. Thierry, could you tell me what are the key elements to really launch a trustful ecosystems of data marketplaces?
Thank you, Andriy, for the kind introduction and for the question. So I would go maybe in more deeper in the data marketplace role, what they have to deliver really. So because to apply privacy by design, we have to really go in the details of the data marketplace. So for the moment, at least we have 3 key points for a data marketplace. The first one is to provide tools to monitor what really happens to my data on the data marketplace. And it's not only a dashboard to see if I have really revenue for my data, but what really happened, how many people will be really interested by my data, if they want to download my data, if they want just to consult my data and so on, and also what happens if they download my data. It's really critical because if you need trusted parties, the data marketplace is in the middle of trusted parties. So you have a consumer and producer of data, and in the middle you have the broker. So how the broker can really play this role of trusted parties? So it's really to provide tools to monitor what happens to my data, and also to provide to assume that there is a high quality of data in what they try to sell, because I think this is the first risk of hacking for the moment. After fake news, we could have fake data. Typically to really push you to use some data and to push your customer to have some new habits and so on. So it's really a risk, and it's very difficult to manage that. For a data owner, you have to be sure that you provide good quality of data, and that nobody will republish your own data, or if they republish without any change in the datasets. And if really the consumer will retrieve the data owner, it has a tool to do that. So this is really the first point. The second point for a data marketplace is also the search engine. Because if we are really in the big data world, so it's not only 10 or 100 datasets you have. You will have more than that. So I think one of the good examples is for the moment the Open Data Portal for the European community. So I think 6 months ago we have 550,000 datasets on the Open Data Portal. We have now more than 800,000. So it's a very huge number of datasets, very different contents, and if you have to find what is really interesting for you, for your business, it's not so easy. It's not so easy because also we describe basically with the categories and keywords what are the data. So it's very difficult to retrieve something because you always put keywords regarding your business. And you can use different keywords for the same data. So it's also very difficult to retrieve what is interesting for you. And I would take an example regarding geolocation, which is key for the moment for many services. But when we manage geolocation for a telco point of view, we are managing that regarding mobile network sales, typically, which is completely different regarding retailers. Retailers will have some area for customers. And if you are in the city, it's also different. This is a whole area for the cities. So how can you really retrieve the data for the same customer in the same place? They will be described in different ways. So this is really the power of the search engine that will make the difference of the data marketplace. And So a third point are the license models. So here also the open data propose many improvements because they define some license models, and you have to attach the license model to your data, which seems quite easy if you have just a static datasets. But if you use some APIs where you will access data in streaming modes or at some times and so on, to manage the license is much more complex. And many data marketplaces propose their own license model because it's not really a license model, it's just a pricing model. They propose to sell the value of your data, to sell the value you see in your own data. Because first, the promise of big data is that your data have some value because we can cross them with other data. I think it's also critical that you have not to propose a very big price for data because you don't know really what is the value before to cross with any other data. And I think this is a point that we have for the moment. Many data marketplaces which are for silos. You can find data marketplace for financial data. You can find data marketplace for legal data. But do you have to subscribe to many data marketplaces to discover the business behind all the data to be sure that you will be able to retrieve what is interesting for you? So it's also the point. The data marketplace could really emerge if you have different context data in the same place. And it's quite difficult also to assume. So for the license, we need traceability. And traceability, I think this is a good point of GDPR. We have now some rules in GDPR to manage, to manipulate the data. So it's quite easy for the moment to use some semantic tools to implement really mechanisms that you can say, okay, I'm the data owner. I sell that to another data owner who will do some operation on my data. And also, in this case, I have names of people, I have roles in entities, and I can really track and trace all the operations that are done on my data. The point is that we can also use blockchain to validate and to reinforce the security. But in this case, it could be in an open, open market because it will use lots of computing resources, it will cost a lot, so it will be difficult to have a business model for that. If you have a private data marketplace, you can have a light system with blockchain. You have not to have the same proof of work to really use the blockchain, and you can really reinforce that. So we have to retrieve new tools to really have a consistent system and to interconnect also the different data marketplaces. And another point also is where are the data? Because you can have data marketplace where you have to replicate your data. So if you copy your data in another place, you increase the risk. It's very difficult to know what happens. So this is the easy point. The more difficult point, if we are again in the big data world, and I will take the case of the Copernicus data. If I have 10 petabytes of data, how can I really transfer my data to a data marketplace? The volume is too huge. The same for Airbus, which collects 10 terabytes of data about engines every day. So we have also to find a system for data marketplace that can just be a relationship with where the data are. And again, in this case, you will access the data through APIs. So in this case, the tools to monitor what happens through the APIs and the license that could be managed there is really critical. I think also a point now is the description of the data. So as I explained, so we have different business, different vocabulary per business. So we have to find some system where we can automatically describe the data. This will enrich a lot the data description, but we are creating new metadata. So what is the ownership of the metadata? Because if you propose a tool to create metadata, in this case, the metadata are your data. It's not the data of the data producer at the beginning. So I think it's another point about the data ownerships that we have to solve. But basically, we can create data marketplace with lots of metadata. And metadata will be key also to do some recommendation. I speak about search engine, but after that, it's recommendation. If I'm interested in data regarding energy provider, maybe another has also used this kind of data and use other data sets. So maybe I could be also interested by other data sets. It could really simplify the way I'm looking for data. But metadata in this case could be the key part and could be also the only centralized part really for the data marketplace. So there are some of the technical part of the data marketplace which for me for the moment explains that they are not really big data marketplace at the moment. Some colleagues ask me why I cannot ask Google to find data, really. So if you ask Google to retrieve really a data set for you, you will not really have a good result. So search engines are not for the moment dedicated to that. And to challenge also the value of your data, because technology progress every day. So you certainly have heard about success from AlphaGo from Google. So they generate some data. So instead of encrypting some data, we can also generate now some data like your data. So the open question for the moment is, can we really use simulated data, generated data, instead of real data? Can we create the same value of that? And are the data marketplace able to really emerge before we have too many simulated data that could kill their own business model? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thierry. That was a very interesting presentation and the description of the various key elements. Could you perhaps tell me whether there are already some concrete initiatives for the marketplace platforms where security and privacy capabilities are offered?
We have started to work on the prototypes so that can really manage traceability and license. And it's why we create lots of metadata, because if you create metadata for any action on datasets, you create really lots of data immediately. And so we are testing these tools for the moment. So we've reached some scalability because with semantics technology, which are not so operational for the moment, I would say, we are able to manage very easily more than 700,000 datasets really in real time. So we are checking how we can have a kind of peer-to-peer networks, because we don't think that we can find for the moment a unique actor that is the key actor to launch data marketplace. So we want just to create an ecosystem for that, where everybody could use the same kind of tools to reinforce confidence of the quality of data, trusted parties, and so on. So it's really the view we have. So it could be maybe like a peer-to-peer network we have before for sharing videos and these kind of things, which are all technologies, but very useful to share some things that are not centralized. So if we can add some security mechanisms on top of that, we can really create an ecosystem.
Thank you very much. So now we have already some very good idea on the business models, the technology, and the legal issues. We will conclude this session with another video from Enka Vukian, and after that we'll go to a question and answer session.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end by talking to you about a new international council I've just formed called Global Privacy and Security by Design. And this will relate indirectly to your questions 1 and 3 in terms of tech and business models. What can we do to embed privacy into these? There's been a lot of talk about privacy by design, but now I've also mentioned that I'm formulating this new GPS by design. And the reason I'm calling it global privacy and security by design is you've got to have both. As I said, you've got to get rid of the zero-sum mindset of privacy versus security. You must have both of them present. And that's what I'm hoping to do with my International Council. And I've had great success with the people who are joining me as the founding members. You can see them here, people from Canada, the United States, the European Union, Giulia, for example, Director of Counterterrorism in the EU. And we've got a number of people, both from privacy and security fields in the private sector and public sector, because they all realize you have to have both privacy and security embedded into the design, privacy and data analytics. We can do this all, but we've got to change the mindset. That's the biggest challenge. So these are the goals of my new council, which is all about extending privacy by design to really raise awareness of how important it is to get rid of the zero-sum mindset. And we can do this. We're already doing this. We're holding a major gala at the end of this month where all the major companies are coming forward. We're going to raise funds for research on how to do privacy and data analytics and big data and security in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks. Homomorphic encryption is fabulous. So we're going to look at all of these and create things like smart data, privacy protective surveillance. We can do it all. I want you to take a look. If you don't mind, go to my website, gpsbydesign.org, and if you have any interest, please join. There's no cost to joining. It just shows that you have an interest, and we'll send you information as more work and research develops. Let me end, ladies and gentlemen, by just asking you to be proactive about embedding much needed privacy protective measures into the design of your operations. You will have much greater research and you will be freer with the research that you generate. For example, if you de-identify the data, remove the personal identifiers, and use strong de-identification protocols combined with a risk of re-identification framework, minimizing the likelihood of re-identification dramatically. Less than the likelihood of being hit by lightning, less than 0.03%. You can do this. We've had great success, and I would love to ask you to consider doing this and abandoning zero sum. Let me thank Antonio for kindly inviting me to speak to you today. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are very well in time as we planned. Now, if you have any questions, you can feel free to use the microphone. Yep.
Hello? Yeah. Hi, my name is Federico Benedetto, and I work for a startup in London that works in this privacy by design space. We build tools that uses technologies like homomorphic encryption or de-anonymization technologies to enable privacy and analytics, and the startup is called Privatar. My question is, on one end, we are saying privacy by design is really specific to a use case, an application, because you have to de-anonymize the data for that specific use case so that it retains the utility for that use case. On the other end, we have the concept of marketplaces where data is shared between multiple participants, or they can buy and sell it for any use. So that the two things seems different to me, and is there a way to solve this problem? Is it possible to have both, privacy by design and general purpose marketplaces? Thank you.
Who would like to answer the question?
I can start, maybe. I fully agree. From a big data point of view, I would say I cannot think about any anonymization process that could resist if I can retrieve enough data to make many correlations, and I will break any systems. I think this is the point. But for the moment, it's not so easy to retrieve all the data. So for sure, we can apply some system to have anonymization. My colleagues have the same point that I need the use case to know exactly what are the key data I have to anonymize to be sure that we'll break nothing. I think we have to work a bit on this part, and the other way to do, and which is studied a lot also for the moment, is homomorphic encryptions. Because in this case, you should access the data without really to have the view of the first level of data. So we transform the data in the way you have the same thing. We can add some noise and these kind of things. So we can find other ways at clear anonymization. But again, regarding the status of how many data sets are available, and that in general, we are more staying in our own business areas and really taking benefits of data from other business and so on. I think anonymization is for the moment a good tool, clearly. And we can provide some solution in data marketplace to say, okay, we can really resist to some attack. After that, it's a risk management question. But I think for the moment, we have good solution because homomorphic encryption is not ready for operations. I don't know if Zhou, you want to add something?
So maybe I can just add something to your point. This is very good questions. And actually, so I'm personally also working on the technical field. But I don't think that technical alone can solve all the problems, especially so if there's a lot of organizations or different parties involved in the big data market, and it's extremely hard to control the risk. And also, as I said in my talk, that is the development for future technologies is very hard to predict what kind of risk we could have in the future. And I think in these cases, and we need to build a trust. So it's not only technology, but also the trust between the parties, and we need exactly also a very good ecosystem can support that the different organizations work together to build a very reliable and trustworthy systems for the customers of the big data market, and also for the end user. And this is just my point. And of course, we can also expect that in the future, more technologies regarding privacy and protections can be available in the market, but is still under development. I think we need to work on both sides. Yeah.
Any other questions? So far, I don't see any, but whenever you have, just feel free to use the microphone. So I'll ask Antonio, I know you have a question.
Yeah, so actually it relates to the previous question. So we have this issue that it's use case based, and for use case and a given purpose, you have a perfect solution. Yet on the other side, the promise is very generic. So actually, you don't want to have a use case based. You want to have something that is for all use cases. Okay. So we have this gap, and one of the reaction that the business people have is that well, then we have to need a strategy, because we start with this use case. But this use case is good enough so that actually the data, maybe later on we reuse it for the other use case, and we do the other anonymization and things like that. Okay, so there is this kind of work, and my question maybe to all of you is whether we have discussion on those things and on the strategy that actually those big companies will have actually to be sure that they comply with GDPR. But to start with something that they can reuse, because it's all about reusability in business.
Who would like to?
Okay.
Maybe I can start again from Orange side. So we are working on the GDPR implementation, I think since last July, so a long time now. So first to educate all the project managers that can use some data and to explain what could be the good principle to manage that. But at the end, this is more risk management, and we are waiting also for e-privacy constraints, because this one will propose much more things, much more technology we have and tools we have to implement regarding end users and how they can really manage their data. So I think this is the second wave, and this one is much more complicated to prepare than the GDPR. GDPR are roles that could be clearly defined in the structure of the organization. And for the other points, this is really a risk management or process you have to follow, like certification and so on. So it's not so difficult. Of course, time is short to really put all the action in place, but it's feasible, clearly. But the second step will be more difficult.
Thank you very much. Natalie, did you want to add something?
Well, I wanted to add, maybe coming back to the slides that's shown now for the entire panel, that we should not forget about the gray circle that is on top about user control, and that this is important also. It's not about there was a use case and there was some data used, and now there's some data that we could reuse and it was repurposed, and it could be a different combination of data. We also have to invest research into seeing how this user control that is required by GDPR is implemented in this data marketplace. And to me, there's no way that I can say here, well, it's simple, there's this solution, and it's still something that for us, we are researching at the moment.
So that's interesting, and actually it leads to my maybe last question is, I think the panelists showed a very in-depth understanding of the issue. So it's the problem is how we put them together, and that we have lots of challenges. Okay, Natalie mentioned maybe you have a new ownership understanding. Okay, and so my question is to all of you. Are we able to work together? We have this BDVA association, the PPP. So can we address those things? Do you see that we're doing it properly in time, so that actually the market is going faster than us, or not? Are we able to be ready in time? Okay.
You go first.
I think this is a topic we can address through the BDVA, which is an industrial association, to try to propose some common answer. The main issue for the moment is that regarding GDPR, e-privacy and so on, so there are more company subjects. So every company are proposing their own answer, their own view on the subject and so on. So it's more difficult to have a global view. And then typically, I think we have at the right moment for propose something, maybe not like a standardization of the view, but to have a concrete technical guidelines to implement things and this kind of things.
Yeah, I think from my side, from being active within BDVA, from the policy and the societal task force, we are definitely trying to raise awareness, to create sessions on different topics, and to actually inject the societal and legal and GDPR input into the experimentation that is actually supported and encouraged by BDVA. So I think there's definitely the right attention, and everyone's willing to work towards reaching this potential. But indeed, I can second what you're saying, Antonio, that there are still challenges ahead. Yeah.
Okay, we are well in time, and thank you everyone for very interesting discussions and presentations. And also thank you to all of you for your interest and